Hello, survivors. Do you want to be part of the next stories? Comment below your name and the situation you would like to be in. Don't forget to subscribe. Let's begin. I've debated posting this for months now. Hell, I've debated a lot of things since October. But people deserve to know what happened up here, what we saw, what we chose to do. My name is Terry Neville, and I was the commander of the International Space Station during those first 12 hours when everything fell apart. Most survivor accounts come from the ground level, people running, hiding, fighting. Mine comes from 408 kilometers above your heads, watching civilization collapse in real time through a cupola window. Trust me when I say that perspective changes everything. It started on October 15th during our morning routine. I was reviewing telemetry data while Rodriguez calibrated the communication array, and Petrov worked on water reclamation systems. Standard Tuesday morning stuff, the kind of mundane tasks that keep a space station running. The Earth rotated peacefully below us, that familiar blue marble we'd seen thousands of times during our 6-month mission. The morning light crept across the North American continent as we completed our 90-minute orbit. I remember thinking how beautiful the Great Lakes looked from our altitude, their surfaces reflecting sunlight like scattered diamonds. Detroit sprawled along the shoreline in its geometric patterns of urban planning. Highways threading through neighborhoods like arteries through living tissue. Everything appeared normal, ordered, alive with the invisible pulse of 8 million people going about their daily routines. Then Houston went quiet. Not unusual by itself. Communication blackouts happen, solar interference, equipment failures, routine maintenance. But this silence stretched longer than protocol allowed. When the backup channels stayed dead for 47 minutes, we knew something was wrong. I floated near the communication console, watching the digital displays cycle through dead frequencies. My stomach had that familiar, weightless flutter. But this time it wasn't from microgravity. 23 years in the Air Force had taught me to recognize the taste of approaching crisis. Metallic, sharp, like breathing through copper mesh. The first transmission that broke through wasn't from NASA. It was a desperate, fragmented signal from what sounded like NORAD. All stations, this is Cheyenne Mountain. Outbreak confirmed in 17 major metropolitan areas. Biological agent spreads through direct contact, seeking immediate consultation on orbital assets. I still remember the way those words seemed to hang in the recycled air of our module. Rodriguez looked up from his console, dark eyes reflecting the same confusion I felt. His hands had stopped moving over the keyboard, frozen in mid-keystroke like his brain was refusing to process what we'd heard. "Commander, are we receiving some kind of training exercise transmission?" Before I could answer, our primary communication screen flickered to life. The face that appeared belonged to Director Walsh from Mission Control, but she looked haggard, her usually pristine appearance disheveled. Her blonde hair hung loose around her face instead of pulled back in its regulation style. Background noise suggested chaos, people shouting, alarms blaring, the constant chatter of emergency protocols overlapping into an incomprehensible wall of sound. ISS, this is Houston Control. We have a developing situation. Stand by for emergency briefing. Houston, this is ISS Commander Neville. Please clarify the nature of this emergency. Walsh's image pixelated as interference disrupted the signal. When it stabilized, her expression had grown more grave. Dark circles under her eyes suggested she hadn't slept. Her hands shook slightly as she reached for something off camera. "Terry, we're dealing with a biological contamination event across multiple urban centers. The infected individuals display extreme aggressive behavior and appear to transmit the condition through bites. Military response is overwhelmed." The clinical language couldn't mask the terror in her voice. I'd known Catherine Walsh for 8 years, worked with her through 3 previous missions. She was unflappable, the kind of person who could coordinate a space rescue while eating lunch. Seeing her like this sent ice through my veins. I processed those words carefully. 23 years in the Air Force taught me to read between the lines of sanitized briefings. "Are you describing some kind of viral outbreak, Director?" The science teams are still analyzing. but preliminary reports suggest the affected individuals lose higher cognitive functions while retaining basic motor skills and an apparent drive to attack others. They're moving through cities, Terry, spreading it faster than we can track. They're calling them. She paused, looking off camera at something that made her face go pale. They're calling them zombies, Terry. The word hung in the space between us like a malformed prayer. Rodriguez crossed himself, his hand moving automatically to the silver crucifix he wore beneath his flight suit. The small cross had belonged to his grandmother, carried him through 2 tours in Afghanistan before he became an astronaut. Petrov stopped his work entirely, floating motionless near the water filtration unit, his usually steady hands gripping a maintenance tool so tightly his knuckles had gone white. My mind raced through the implications. Zombies. The term was absurd, something from late-night movies and video games. But Walsh wasn't prone to hyperbole, and the raw fear in her eyes told me she was describing something beyond normal human experience. "What are our orders?" I asked, though part of me already knew. "Emergency return protocol is in effect. Soyuz capsule prep begins immediately. We need all hands on the ground for the crisis response." I looked out through the cupola at the Earth below. From our altitude, everything appeared normal. City lights twinkled in the Terminator line where day met night. Weather patterns swirled with mathematical precision. Hurricane formations off the Gulf Coast followed predictable meteorological patterns. No visible signs of the chaos Walsh described. But my training kicked in, the analytical mindset that had kept me alive through combat missions and space emergencies. If the situation was as bad as she indicated, 3 additional personnel wouldn't make a meaningful difference. 3 astronauts with specialized skills maintaining orbital infrastructure, however, could be invaluable. "Director, with respect, that doesn't make tactical sense. If this situation is as widespread as you're indicating, our presence here might be more valuable than 3 additional personnel on the ground." The transmission began to break up. Walsh's voice came through in fragments. "Not a request, Commander. Immediate return. Resources needed." Her image dissolved into static, pixelated blocks that reformed and dissolved again like digital snow. Then nothing. The screen went black, leaving us in the gentle hum of life support systems and the distant rumble of the station's rotation. The silence that followed felt oppressive. Rodriguez tried to re-establish contact for the next hour while I monitored our orbital position, and Petrov ran diagnostics on every system we had. I found myself staring at the Earth through the observation window, looking for changes I couldn't yet define. During our next pass over North America, I noticed the first anomaly. The traffic patterns along Interstate 95 looked wrong. Instead of the normal flow of vehicles, there appeared to be massive congestion stretching from Boston to Washington, not rush hour traffic. This was different. The congestion seemed to radiate outward from major cities like blood flowing from wounds. "Rodriguez, bring up the high-resolution cameras. Focus on the eastern corridor." The images that filled our screens were disturbing. Major highways showed massive traffic jams, but the vehicles weren't moving. They appeared abandoned, doors open, belongings scattered across asphalt like discarded memories. Some cars were overturned. Others sat empty in the middle of traffic lanes while their occupants had apparently fled on foot. "My God," Rodriguez whispered. "What happened to all those people?" I had no answer. We watched similar scenes unfold across every major metropolitan area we passed. The mathematical precision of our orbit had become a countdown timer, each 90-minute cycle revealing new devastation. When communications finally came back online 3 hours later, it wasn't Walsh's voice we heard. "ISS, this is Colonel Marcus Stone, Emergency Command Authority. Director Walsh is no longer available. I'm coordinating space assets for Homeland Defense operations." The change in personnel spoke volumes. Emergency Command Authority meant military control. Crisis escalation beyond civilian management capabilities. "Colonel, this is Commander Neville. What's the status of Houston Control?" "Johnson Space Center has been evacuated. The Houston metropolitan area is under biological quarantine. ISS crew will remain on station until further notice." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the station's temperature regulation. My wife lived in Clear Lake, 15 minutes from Johnson Space Center. My daughter was a sophomore at Rice University in downtown Houston. The words biological quarantine meant they were trapped inside whatever was happening down there. Colonel, our previous orders were for immediate return. Previous orders are rescinded. Your current mission is to maintain orbital communication capabilities and provide reconnaissance support. Essential personnel only remain at ground facilities. The implications hit me like decompression. We weren't being recalled anymore. We were being abandoned. But worse than that, we were being asked to watch helplessly while everyone we loved faced something so terrible that the military had resorted to quarantine protocols. Sir, what's our supply situation? The next cargo resupply isn't scheduled for 6 weeks. Stone's voice carried the weight of someone making impossible decisions. ISS crew is authorized to utilize all available resources for extended operation. Mission duration is indefinite. After that transmission ended, the three of us floated in silence, absorbing the magnitude of our situation. Through the cupola, I watched the Earth complete another rotation. But now I was looking for different things. Changes, anomalies, signs of the crisis Stone had mentioned. My mind kept returning to my family. Emily would be in her immunology class about now, probably taking notes on viral transmission vectors with no idea that a real outbreak was spreading through her city. Margaret would be at her job at the medical center, maybe dealing with the first wave of infected patients without understanding what she was facing. The rational part of my brain, the part trained to command in crisis situations, understood why we needed to stay. The ISS represented humanity's most advanced technological achievement. The satellite networks we could access and coordinate were worth more than the lives of 3 astronauts. But the father and husband in me wanted to commandeer the Soyuz capsule and crash land in Houston if necessary. It took several orbits before I saw them clearly. Cities that should have blazed with lights were dimmer. The power grid failures became more obvious as darkness fell across continents. New York showed irregular illumination patterns, entire boroughs going dark while others blazed with what looked like fires. As we passed over the eastern seaboard, I noticed flickering orange spots that could only be large-scale burning, the kind that happens when emergency services can't respond. Rodriguez used our high-resolution cameras to zoom in on specific metropolitan areas. The images we captured defied immediate explanation. The abandoned highways were just the beginning. Entire neighborhoods showed signs of hasty evacuation, doors left open, possessions scattered in yards, vehicles crashed into storefronts and lampposts. "Commander," Petrov called from the observation module. "You need to see this." I joined him at the window. We were passing over what looked like Phoenix during local daytime. The city spread below us in familiar geometric patterns, but something was fundamentally wrong with the movement dynamics. Instead of the normal flow of traffic and pedestrian activity, there were irregular streams of people moving outward from the urban center. Thousands of them, maybe tens of thousands. From our altitude, the human streams looked like spilled liquid, flowing along highways but also spreading across parks, golf courses, and desert areas. The movement had an organic quality that defied the geometric order of urban planning. "Mass evacuation," Rodriguez observed, joining us with a camera equipped with our most powerful lens. I shook my head, studying the patterns more carefully. "Look at the direction. It's not organized evacuation. It's panic flight." The streams of humanity flowed like bacterial growth across a culture dish, following paths of least resistance but spreading in all directions simultaneously. Some groups moved along highways, others cut across open terrain. The randomness suggested terror rather than planned relocation. "There," Petrov pointed toward the center of the city. "You see the dark areas? Those should be populated neighborhoods." He was right. Sections of Phoenix that should have been bustling with activity appeared eerily still. No traffic movement, no visible pedestrian flow. Just empty streets under the harsh desert sun, like someone had drawn boundaries around dead zones. We documented everything we could, taking photographs and video recordings. As Earth rotated beneath us, we witnessed similar patterns in Dallas. Atlanta and Chicago. The migration flows always moved outward from urban centers, and the pace suggested desperation rather than orderly evacuation. The scale of human displacement was staggering. Based on population density estimates and the area coverage we could observe, we were witnessing the movement of tens of millions of people, the largest human migration in recorded history, happening in real time beneath our feet. Then we started seeing the smoke, not just individual building fires, but entire city blocks burning simultaneously. The smoke plumes were massive, visible from orbit as dark smudges against the clear atmosphere. Los Angeles showed 17 separate fire zones, each one large enough to be seen from space. New York had smoke rising from Manhattan, Brooklyn, and Queens simultaneously, creating a gray haze that obscured entire boroughs. "Jesus," Rodriguez whispered, watching the images on our monitor. "How many people are down there?" I did the mental calculation that would haunt me for months. Based on population density and the scope of what we could observe, we were witnessing the displacement of millions of people, maybe tens of millions. Cities with populations larger than entire countries were emptying in a matter of hours. The worst part was our helplessness. We could watch, document, and record, but we couldn't help. We were trapped in a metal tube, orbiting uselessly while the world burned below. Every 90 minutes we completed another orbit, and every orbit showed more destruction, more displacement, more evidence that civilization was collapsing in real time. My hands shook as I operated the cameras, zooming in on areas where I could make out individual figures. The resolution wasn't quite sufficient to see faces, but I could identify human forms moving through streets, across parking lots, through residential areas. Some moved in groups, others alone. The randomness of their movement patterns suggested panic rather than purpose. During our pass over the West Coast, we witnessed something that made my stomach clench. A major interstate highway, I think it was Interstate 5 near Los Angeles, showed a traffic jam that stretched for what looked like 50 miles. But this wasn't normal congestion. Vehicles were abandoned in place, creating an automotive graveyard that stretched from the city limits to the horizon. Among the cars, we could see thousands of people walking, carrying whatever they could manage. "They're walking out of the cities," Petrov observed. "All of them, at the same time." The implications were staggering. For that many people to abandon their vehicles and homes simultaneously suggested a threat so immediate and terrifying that normal social order had simply evaporated. As our orbit carried us over the Pacific, I made a decision that probably saved our lives and definitely changed our mission forever. "We're not going home," I announced to my crew. Rodriguez turned from his monitoring station. "Commander, Earth needs eyes up here. Communication relays, satellite coordination. Whatever's happening down there, they're going to need every technological advantage they can get. We stay operational." The decision felt both logical and terrifying. Logical because our orbital position gave us unique capabilities that could help coordinate whatever response remained possible. Terrifying because it meant accepting that we might never see our families again. Petrov nodded slowly, his weathered face reflecting years of hard decisions. "The station represents years of international cooperation, billions of dollars in research capability." "More than that," I replied, watching the Terminator line creep across Asia. "We might be the only neutral observers left. If this crisis spreads globally, someone needs to maintain the satellite network. Someone needs to witness what happens." None of us spoke about the personal cost of that decision. We all had families below, friends, lives we were choosing to potentially sacrifice for the greater mission. Rodriguez had twin daughters in San Antonio. Petrov's elderly parents lived in a small town outside Moscow. My own family was trapped somewhere in the Houston quarantine zone. But as we watched another city begin to burn in the distance, this time it looked like Seattle. The mathematics of survival became brutally clear. 3 astronauts on the ground would be 3 more refugees in a world that was running out of safe places. 3 astronauts in orbit could maintain communication networks, coordinate satellite resources, and preserve some fragment of technological civilization. The weight of that responsibility settled over me like a lead blanket. We were no longer astronauts on a routine mission. We had become the orbital guardians of a dying world, witnesses to the end of everything we had known. As night fell across the Americas, the cities below us flickered with fires instead of streetlights. The geometric patterns of urban planning were being rewritten by chaos, and from our privileged position 408 kilometers above it all, we could only watch and record humanity's darkest hour. The transition from night to day brought no relief. As the Terminator line swept across Asia, revealing the scope of destruction in daylight, I realized we weren't just witnessing the collapse of American cities. This was global. Beijing showed the same patterns we'd observed in the United States, massive human migrations flowing outward from urban centers like blood from arterial wounds. The geometric precision of China's planned cities was being destroyed by organic chaos. Highways that normally carried ordered traffic now resembled ant trails, black lines of humanity stretching across the countryside. Moscow was burning. From our altitude, I could see at least 12 major fire zones across the metropolitan area. Petrov pressed his face against the observation window, his breath fogging the glass as he stared down at his homeland. He hadn't spoken in hours, not since we'd lost contact with his family's village outside the city. "The ring road," he finally whispered, pointing at a circular pattern of lights that should have been traffic but appeared stationary. "It's completely blocked. No one is moving." Rodriguez worked frantically at the communication console, cycling through every available frequency. "I'm picking up fragments from ground stations worldwide. Listen to this." He patched the audio through our speakers, a mixture of languages, English, Spanish, Mandarin, Russian, all carrying the same desperate tone. "Brisbane completely overrun. Estimate 2 million displaced. Mumbai defense lines falling back toward the coast. Zombie hordes advancing on Seoul from 3 directions. As our orbit carried us over the Pacific toward Asia, we witnessed something that changed everything. A brilliant flash erupted from what appeared to be the Tokyo metropolitan area. The light was unmistakable, the signature of a nuclear detonation. A perfect white sphere of plasma expanding outward, followed by the characteristic mushroom cloud rising into the atmosphere. "Jesus Christ," Rodriguez whispered. "They actually did it." Before any of us could process the implications, another flash lit up the horizon. This one was closer to Osaka, then another, further north near Sendai. In the span of 10 minutes, we watched 3 nuclear weapons detonate across the Japanese archipelago. "They're using nuclear weapons on their own cities," I said, my voice hollow with shock. The radio channels erupted with panicked transmissions. "Tactical nuclear strikes authorized for containment zones. Fallout projections show acceptable civilian casualties. Zombie concentrations eliminated but radiation spreading." As we continued our orbit, the pattern became horrifyingly clear. Nation after nation was resorting to nuclear weapons as a last resort against the infected populations. The flashes became regular, like deadly fireworks across the face of the Earth. Over the next 6 hours, we witnessed nuclear detonations in Seoul, where massive infected hordes had gathered near the Han River. The government dropped a tactical nuke that vaporized the city center. Mumbai, 3 separate warheads struck the sprawling metropolitan area as infected populations reached critical mass. Moscow, Petrov watched in stunned silence as his capital city disappeared in atomic fire. The Kremlin's golden domes vaporized in an instant. Paris, the city of light, became a city of atomic fire as French authorities made the desperate decision to nuke their own cultural center. London. We watched the Thames Valley light up with nuclear fire, the ancient city consuming itself to stop the spread. Berlin, already devastated by infected. The German government finished the job with tactical nuclear strikes. Washington, D.C., the most shocking of all. We watched as the United States government made the ultimate sacrifice. Nuclear fire consuming the Capitol dome, the White House, and the monuments that had stood as symbols of democracy. "My God," Petrov whispered, tears floating in microgravity as Moscow's mushroom cloud spread across the Russian steppes. "They're destroying everything. All of it." The nuclear strikes weren't clean or precise. Entire city centers were simply gone. vaporized in atomic fire. The destruction was absolute within the blast zones, but we could observe the aftermath through our thermal imaging. The infected populations that had been outside the immediate blast radius were moving away from the destroyed areas, dispersing into the countryside and spreading toward areas that had previously been safe. "Commander," Rodriguez's voice was strained, "I'm receiving a priority transmission on military emergency frequency. It's addressed to you specifically." My stomach dropped. After watching half the world's major cities get nuked, I wasn't sure I wanted to hear what new horror was being planned. "Put it through." The voice that came through our speakers was calm, professional, and terrifying in its implications. "ISS Commander Neville, this is General Patricia Hayes, Strategic Command. I need to speak with you immediately on a classified channel." I'd heard of General Hayes. She was one of the architects of modern space-based defense systems, the kind of person who understood orbital mechanics as well as nuclear strategy. If she was calling us after the nuclear nightmare we'd just witnessed, we were about to be asked to do something extraordinary. "General, this is Commander Neville. We're receiving you clearly." "Terry, I'm going to be direct. The nuclear option has created massive destruction zones, but the infected populations are simply dispersing around them. We've lost entire city centers while the outbreak continues to spread through surrounding areas. We need a different approach." I found myself gripping the communication console, my knuckles white in the artificial light of the module. "What are you asking of us, General?" "We need your help with a targeted orbital strike. We're using a deorbiting satellite as a kinetic weapon. The ISS has the computational power and orbital position to calculate precise impact coordinates for maximum effectiveness." The implications of her request sank in slowly. After watching nuclear weapons devastate entire city centers, she was asking us to weaponize space assets, to drop a satellite on a populated area, but this time it would be surgical, precise, without the wholesale destruction that was eliminating entire urban areas. "General, what's the target?" "Atlanta, Georgia. Unlike the other major cities, Atlanta hasn't been nuked yet because of its proximity to the CDC headquarters in Athens. But the city center has become what our analysts are calling a zombie convergence zone. Approximately 400,000 infected have gathered in the downtown area. They're showing coordinated movement patterns we don't understand, potentially preparing for a massive surge toward refugee camps in Alabama and Tennessee. Atlanta. I'd flown over that city hundreds of times during my Air Force career. Margaret and I had spent our honeymoon there, walking through Centennial Olympic Park. Now it might become the site of the first orbital kinetic strike in human history. "General, what's the collateral damage assessment?" "Minimal. Thermal imaging shows virtually no human survivors in the target zone. The infected have driven out or consumed the remaining population. We're looking at a crater approximately 2 kilometers in diameter. The satellite we're deorbiting has a mass of 6,800 kilograms traveling at roughly 17,000 miles per hour. Clean impact, precise targeting." I closed my eyes, running the physics calculations automatically. Kinetic energy would be equivalent to a tactical nuclear weapon, but without the wholesale devastation that was consuming entire cities. "How long do I have to make this decision?" "The optimal orbital window opens in 47 minutes. After that, we lose the angle of approach for maximum effectiveness. 47 minutes to decide whether to become humanity's orbital executioner." As we discussed the technical details, another flash lit up the horizon. This time it was somewhere in Eastern Europe, Prague or Vienna. Impossible to tell from our altitude. The nuclear bombardment was continuing, even though we could all see it wasn't working. "I need to discuss this with my crew." "Understood. But Terry, if we don't stop the concentration in Atlanta, our models suggest it will grow to over 1 million infected within 72 hours. After watching the nuclear devastation across Asia and Europe, this kinetic approach might be our only chance to develop a surgical strategy against concentrated infected populations." The transmission ended, leaving us in the familiar hum of life support systems. But now that hum sounded different, like a countdown timer. Rodriguez was monitoring the ongoing nuclear strikes across Europe. Another detonation over what looks like Budapest. That's the 15th nuclear weapon used in the last 8 hours. Petrov remained silent, staring out at the Earth below. The planet was being systematically destroyed by its own inhabitants in a desperate attempt to stop the infected. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone watching his entire world disappear. Nuclear weapons are destroying everything. The cities, the history, the people. Maybe precision is better than annihilation. I understood his logic. The orbital kinetic strike would be surgical, targeted without the widespread contamination that was turning vast areas into radioactive wastelands. If it worked, it could provide a template for stopping infected concentrations without poisoning the planet. Rodriguez pulled up our high-resolution imaging system. Atlanta should be coming into visual range in about 20 minutes. We can confirm the target area ourselves. Those 20 minutes felt like hours. I floated near the communication console, listening to fragments of transmissions describing the nuclear aftermath. Tokyo city center completely destroyed. Moscow blast zone expanding beyond the ring road. London survivors evacuating past the Thames. The nuclear strategy was creating devastation on an unimaginable scale. Entire metropolitan areas were being erased from existence, while the infected continued to spread through the surrounding regions that had escaped the immediate destruction. When Atlanta finally came into view, the sight was unlike anything I'd ever witnessed. The city center appeared to be moving, undulating like a living organism. Through our high-powered cameras, we could see masses of figures packed so densely they looked like a single entity. The entire downtown area was dark, except for scattered fires, and the masses of infected moved in slow, coordinated waves. "There must be hundreds of thousands of them," Rodriguez whispered. "Look at the movement patterns. They're not random anymore." I adjusted the camera settings, studying the behavior. The infected were organizing themselves into geometric formations, creating clear pathways through their mass. It was like watching a massive organism develop intelligence. Coordination, purpose. "Commander?" Petrov pointed to the thermal imaging display. "Look at the heat signatures. They're all running cold, but the density is incredible. That many bodies in such a concentrated area." My radio crackled. "ISS, this is General Hayes. Do you have visual confirmation of the target area?" "Affirmative. General, we're seeing massive concentrations of infected in the downtown area. They appear to be organizing into coordinated formations. Thermal imaging suggests no normal human heat signatures among them." "What's your assessment, Commander?" I stared at the images on our screen. After watching nuclear weapons devastate entire cities across 3 continents, after seeing vast urban centers simply erased from existence while the infected dispersed and continued spreading, the choice became clear. "We'll do it," I said. "One precise kinetic strike instead of destroying another entire city." Satellite designation KH-47, currently in geosynchronous orbit over South America. We need you to calculate the deorbit burn that will bring it down in the center of the convergence zone. I moved to our orbital mechanics computer, my hands moving automatically through calculations I'd performed thousands of times during my career. But this time, instead of planning cargo deliveries or crew rotations, I was plotting the trajectory of humanity's first orbital kinetic weapon. The math was precise, elegant in its simplicity. A 17-minute burn from the satellite's positioning thrusters would alter its orbit enough to bring it down exactly where we needed it. The margin of error was less than 50 meters. Surgical precision from space. "Burn sequence calculated," I reported. "Impact in T-minus 42 minutes from initiation." As I initiated the deorbit sequence, another nuclear flash erupted on the horizon. This one looked like it was over Rome, the ancient city, cradle of Western civilization, consumed by atomic fire in a desperate attempt to stop an enemy that radiation couldn't kill. Deorbit burn initiated. Satellite KH-47 now on terminal trajectory. The next 42 minutes were the longest of my life. We tracked the satellite's descent while watching more nuclear flashes across Europe and Asia. By the time our satellite reached its target, We had witnessed over 20 nuclear detonations, humanity destroying its own greatest cities in a futile attempt to stop an enemy that seemed immune to their most powerful weapons. As the countdown reached its final minutes, we positioned ourselves at the observation windows. Through our cameras, we could see Atlanta spread below us, the downtown area still undulating with infected masses. The satellite itself was invisible to us, a dark object plummeting through the atmosphere at hypersonic speed. "Impact in 30 seconds, I announced. Around the world, the nuclear destruction continued. Entire cities had been erased from the map, their histories and populations vaporized in desperate attempts to stop the spread. Our single kinetic strike was a pinprick compared to the wholesale devastation. But it would be surgical, precise, targeting only the infected concentration. 10 seconds. I found myself holding my breath, my hand gripping the edge of the observation window. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The flash was brilliant but different from the nuclear detonations we'd witnessed. This was pure kinetic energy. No mushroom cloud, no city-destroying blast wave, just the devastating impact of mass and velocity concentrated in a precise point. The light was white-hot but brief, followed by a rapidly expanding cloud of debris and vaporized material. The shock wave rippled outward in a perfect circle, but unlike the nuclear strikes, the destruction was contained, focused, just a precise crater where the infected concentration had been. "Impact confirmed," I reported to General Hayes. "Target area has been neutralized. Clean strike achieved." "Understood, ISS. This is exactly what we hoped for. A surgical strike that eliminates the threat without destroying the entire metropolitan area." But even as I reported our success, another nuclear flash lit up what looked like Barcelona. The nuclear bombardment continued across Europe and Asia, turning the planet into a radioactive wasteland while our single orbital strike had achieved the same result without adding to the contamination. As our orbit continued, we watched the Earth turn beneath us. The nuclear destruction had created massive voids where great cities once stood. Moscow was gone. Tokyo was gone. London, Paris, Berlin, Rome, Washington, D.C., all erased in desperate attempts to stop the spread. Yet from our orbital perspective, we could still see infected populations moving through the areas surrounding the destruction zones. The orbital strike had worked perfectly. The infected concentration in Atlanta was gone, vaporized by kinetic energy with surgical precision. But it was a single success in a world that had chosen to destroy itself rather than find surgical solutions. By the end of what would have been October 16th, we had counted 47 nuclear detonations across Asia, Europe, and North America. Entire metropolitan areas had been erased from existence, while infected populations continued to spread through the regions that had escaped immediate destruction. "We did it right," Rodriguez said quietly, staring at the dark voids where cities once blazed with light. "One precise strike instead of destroying everything." Petrov nodded, watching the darkness where Moscow had been. But they chose annihilation over precision. So much lost. As Earth rotated beneath us, now scarred with massive dark zones where civilization's greatest achievements had been, I realized we had witnessed more than just the first day of an outbreak. We had watched humanity's first desperate response, the choice between surgical precision and wholesale destruction. "This isn't the end," I said, surprising myself with the conviction in my voice. "This is just the first battle. We've learned something up here, that precision works better than annihilation. Someone down there needs to know that." Rodriguez looked up from his monitoring station. "You think anyone's listening anymore?" I gestured toward the observation window, where scattered lights still twinkled across the planet's surface. Not the massive urban illumination we'd known, but smaller points of light scattered across continents, evidence that humanity endured, that communities survived beyond the destroyed metropolitan areas. Someone's still out there, and they're going to need to know what we learned today, that the enemy can be fought without destroying everything we've built. The morning sun rose over a planet transformed by desperate choices. Great cities had been erased, but the lights of smaller communities still dotted the landscape. The infected remained a threat, But humanity had also learned that surgical strikes could work where massive destruction had failed. From our position 408 kilometers above a wounded but still living planet, we three astronauts had become witnesses to humanity's first desperate day against an enemy, unlike any we'd faced. The nuclear option had been tried and had cost us our greatest cities. But our single orbital strike had proven that precision was possible, that the future might hold better solutions than annihilation. As we prepared for our next orbit around this changed world, I realized our mission had evolved. We weren't just maintaining satellites anymore. We were gathering intelligence, proving that surgical responses could work, documenting humanity's first clumsy steps in a war that was far from over. The infected had taken the first day, but the war for humanity's future was just beginning, and from our orbital vantage point, we could see that the fight was far from hopeless.